Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Build Amazing Things Securely. I'm Laura Belmain. Now, we are in season 2, and so we're upping the ante, making sure that we get those guests that you really want to hear. And today, I'm quite excited. I've got a guest, Lachlan. Now, I didn't used to call Lachlan because he's a friend from a time where we called each other silly things on the internet. But we've all grown up. We've all had serious jobs. And now Lachlan is here today to talk about his roles that he's in now and the journey he's been on. So Lachlan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, Laura.
For those who can't see, because, this is an audio podcast and it's delighting me no end, Lachlan's actually holding his mic karaoke style. So if you were going to put a little mental image to this, he's pretty much on the stage ready to belt out the power ballads. But before we get to that, so who are you as a human?
Well, as you said, my name's Lachlan, but some people call me by my silly name, Skooch. Skooch is actually, in fact, still what people call me. So maybe I'm still a little bit sillier, but that's okay. I'm a security engineer. So when we first met, I think, Laura, must have been at KiwiCon many, many years ago. I had started, I think, being a security consultant and doing pen testing and stuff like that. But then eventually I moved countries, moved to Australia from New Zealand, and started working as a security engineer here in Melbourne. I sort of describe myself as a person who likes to do things creatively and wants to be aware of the world that's going on around me, like whether that's the wider industry or whether that's like the organization that I'm a part of. That bigger picture, I think, is really what drives me and what keeps me interested in security. And also satisfies my creative desires, to be honest. I like doing creative things in my spare time. I like playing music and making music and mucking around. So, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Now, what I like about this is that was a really lovely understated description, but you have a really fancy title. Like, you've moved over to Australia and now you've got fancy titles. What's your actual title right now?
My actual title right now is Head of Application Security or Head of AppSec. It is quite a long-winded title, and being a member of the industry, as I'm sure you've experienced yourself, I have feelings about all these different titles that we come up with. Speaking of silly names, aren't the silliest names, I think, sometimes those titles that they put on those JDs and cards.
No, I totally agree with you, and I actually think there's some value in us chatting through that today because we have all these wonderful guests on the show and everyone has these really lofty titles. And when it gets a really lofty title, I then make them tell me what their first job was so that we all feel like normal mortals. But, these titles don't mean anything. And I think the thing we overlook sometimes, and, as a company founder, I find it fairly hilarious is people are like, well, what's my job title going to be? And I'm like, well, let's make something up. Because that's what they are. They're made up labels. So you've gone from being, though, a security consultant in a relatively small country, I love my country dearly, but we're tiny, to now being a head of application security for a much larger organization. So I'd love to dig into how your world has changed. So what type of things were you doing as a consultant and what do you do now as a head of application security? What's the big difference there? Is it the same thing to be a consultant as it is to be the head of security?
That's a really good question. And I think something that's on definitely everyone's minds who do a career change. I think there's sort of two major components to it. I think the first one is, as a consultant, right, you're working as part of a business model that is consultancy, and so the way that you do the work and the way that you conduct yourself and the timelines and the deliverables and how the writing happens is quite different to working in a different business model. And then, like you said, I'd started in consulting doing pen testing and working in the more offensive security space. When you move into an organization doing internal security engineering, you're not obviously your technical activities do change somewhat, but it's really a perspective shift. It's like the fundamental why. The business model is the how, how you deliver, how you go about that stuff and what's the motivations. And then the why is really, the organizational activities and the BAU as they call it. That really drives those two combinations, I think. And the biggest thing that's changed, I'd have to say, would be, I think it's the social interaction that's changed most, which is really interesting that I think I'd say that because I've learned lots of different technical things, the things I never even thought that I would learn shifting into that sort of role. But I think the thing that sticks out to me the most is actually just how I interact with people on the day to day when we do, the BAU or working inside of the org with other people. How we work together is quite fundamentally different. And yeah, that's the biggest difference to me.
Yeah, I think we need to dig into some of these things because there's a lot of romanticism out there, right, about being a penetration tester.
Most definitely.
Every forum is full of people going, "Hey, I want to be a pen tester. How do I do that?"
Oh my God, so much.
If we had as many people wanting to be in the AppSec space inside internal teams, we'd all be very, very happy. But no, everyone wants to break stuff. So how has your perspective changed? Let's start there. And I'm going to come back and ask you in a little bit about that social side and what's different. So what's your perspective like? Did you see organizations the same way as a pen tester as you do now that you're on the inside of them trying to do security? And what's changed?
I think the thing that I've noticed the most and the biggest change for me, tying, I guess, off that social situation sort of thing again, is that as a pen tester, you kind of think of companies in the abstract and organizations and groups of people in the abstract. You're focused on this idea, the idea being the client, and the client wants something and you have a service that you can provide. And so you form a relationship and draw up a statement of work and work with them to deliver that. But I think when you're in an organization, the experience is not different. It's in fact, I think the working model, it really depends on the organization, but it can be more or less complex in that regard, like how you do the business. And I think it's really the social sensations that you get and interactions that you have, really change the feelings of motivation that you get. So if you're a pen tester, you wake up every morning and you go into work and you work on your web app pen test, you're, spending a lot of time in burp, you're looking at, doing the same things over and over again to a certain degree, because that is the nature of, commodification of services and stuff like that. And pen testing is one of those services.
You're destroying dreams here, Skooch. All of these baby pen testers are like, no, don't say it's so. But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I feel the same way. I think romanticism isn't exclusive to the security industry nor technology either. And I definitely think combating it is part of it. It's not that pen testing and consulting and stuff isn't bad. It's just that there's a lot of things that aren't really talked about. And then the better question is, if it's not consulting or pen testing, then what is your other options? So, like when you're working in a regular organization internally, I really feel like, your average day of work isn't like wake up, do pen testing on Fridays, we write reports kind of thing. It's more like, you wake up and you are forced to consider not the client, but everyone around you and what the organization does. You're not abstracted as much and, you can be more or less empowered depending on the situation that you're in the organization, which means I feel like, yes, maybe internal engineering to some degree, not in terms of job security, but in terms of experience is a bit less regular than perhaps being a consultant, and different strokes for different folks and all of that. But and the risk might be slightly greater in terms of, the social interaction and what you're doing day to day. But essentially, I feel like working internally brings me personally, and why it works for me is it brings me personally sense of reward and fulfillment that I previously didn't really understand or discover when I was working as a consultant. And I think that's just due to that complexity. You've got so much more to consider. You can think a lot deeper. You can build long-term relationships. You're not limited to, 1 month engagement, 2 week engagement, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a bit I missed when I switched back from being a pen tester was the sense that you could change things. But it was a complex beast. You've got a lot of people and a lot of systems to work with. Now, you work in a very complex environment at the moment. You're at a telco. So tell us about that. How does AppSec work in a telco? Are there many apps? I've never worked in one before. So I'd love to know what technology looks like inside the box.
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of tech stack, we obviously have, first of all, for delivering two kinds of services. The first one being our internet services, to home addresses. So in Australia, we use the NBN network to do that. In New Zealand, of course, we've got Chorus and stuff like that. And what we do is, we have point of presences, around Australia, which then connects into what we call point of interconnects, POIs, throughout different localized locations in Australia. So we have to run our own, point of presences to provide our internet to those POIs and then to our customers. And then we have our mobile services. So, we're, I guess, what's considered an MVNO, which is actually, I can't even remember off the top of my head what the V stands for, but hopefully someone knows.
It's somebody in the audience will correct us.
It's a small mobile reseller. We don't roll our own infrastructure. We use a wholesaler, and that wholesaler is Telstra.
Okay, cool.
Since they're also our parent organization, belong as a sub brand, I suppose. And cool. So in doing that, we don't necessarily need towers. We don't have to have radio technicians or anything like that, thankfully, because that would be such a pain, I think, for all of us, which is great. We mainly focus on, the actual services you use to manage your mobile services. So we measure the amount of data that people do. We get that from our wholesaler. We're managing stuff like billing. We're managing stuff like onboarding and offboarding, SIM, port in, port out. Recently, regulatory requirements came in around multi-factor authentication. And we're doing the customer experience, I think, is really hugely important to us because we live in an age where, similar to New Zealand, right? Because we only have a few sort of duopoly, triopoly situation when it comes to mobile networks, and we have often a public infrastructure oriented, physical internet connectivity, presence in the country, whether that's through NBN or Chorus, where these companies and this business model is competitive is mostly on price and marketing. That's really and then the differentiation points at similar prices are really, how consumers choose which mobile provider they want to be with. So hence our tech stack is basically like we're all in on, running Next.js. We're all in on running a really upfront, really polished front end customer experience, and then trying to do as seamless as we can order and like browsing and marketing experience as possible. Customer support is also very important, I might add. It's probably one of the other most important things.
Look, this delights me in a way because, even as a technical person, I think I willfully ignore my knowledge of the tech, and that, we've got all these different brands, and like some part of me just genuinely wants to believe they're all separate companies and they all do their own thing and that there's a difference between them. Not the fact that I'm just naturally drawn to some colors and not others, and I liked their website better. Top tip for the audience, the only key differentiator, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere for your internet experiences, is the brand. So you can choose well on price. So please continue to do so. But outside of that, we've got this nice customer experience. We've got this slick tech stack to really drive that up. And you've got your good customer support part on there. Now, how many apps is it really that are in your fold? Do you have an idea off the top of your head? Is it quite a small portfolio of big things, or are they quite dispersed?
A good question. I think, similar to a lot of other businesses that have gone through some form of digital transformation or, have just been around for a while, we have, some legacy code, we have some legacy apps, we have a monolith, it does exist. And then we also have, to support our amazing front end, we also need a back end that's, modern and fast and has all the niceties that you'd expect because, obviously all that data has to come from somewhere. And another thing that's really important for marketing oriented companies is data, not just in the sense of going between front end and back end, but measuring the data and analyzing the data and all that kind of stuff to do marketing activities. Which I've got to be perfectly honest, I'm not a huge marketing guy, as a lot of security people are. I feel like, marketing is something that I'm not super enthused about, especially when it comes to privacy concerns. But I think, at Belong, I've learned to make peace with that and understand that, there are some things you have to do to be competitive as a business in the sort of world that we live in. And I'm trying to strike an epistemological balance between the two. And so we run a lot of Java in our monolith, basically, and we use a lot of AWS. Marketing is, a very time-oriented situation as well. So being able to run campaigns and release new features on schedule and on time is also important to us. So in terms of the total number of apps, we tend to run a set of like semi-microservices. They're not true microservices, but kind of split apart from a monorepo. I think we have about maybe like 15 for backends. We have, different apps again for front ends, sort of micro front ends. Not the true micro front ends pattern, as some front end developers might know, but similar to that sort of situation. And then there's some miscellaneous stuff that we have to run for things like doing identity checking and things like being compliant with ACMA's regulations. That's Australia's Communications and Media Authority. So I'd say all that we're probably looking at somewhere between, probably 30 to 40, maybe 20 to 25 to 35 apps. Yeah, somewhere around there.
There's quite a lot of diversity in that then. We're talking about different ages, different architecture types, different approaches to software. Well, you've got Java in that monolith. You've also got other languages out in the other components you're building. That's quite a lot to manage. And then you've got compliance requirements on top. And as a telco, those are quite rigorously enforced things. Do you have to do a lot of integration on top of this? Are there, other systems from other organizations you have to connect with, or are you able to operate quite isolated?
No, I think that's a really good point. I think as mentioned, the business model for an MVNO or a telco, rather, even in countries like ours, is that you have to integrate. You in fact don't have a choice, right? Because you don't own the infrastructure all the way to the customer, so you're going to be using a provider, no matter how hard you try, unless you're really huge and you decide to, pay a lot of money, millions of dollars to run a cable somewhere. You're going to be stuck. So you have to integrate. Integration for us is really the bread and butter. So I'm glad you brought that up, So whether it's with our wholesale provider, who's giving us our mobile network connection, which is Telstra Wholesale, a division of Telstra that also provides services to other competing mobile brands, MVNOs, I guess, and also NBN-Co. When we provision a connection to a customer, we want to get them set up on NBN so they can use the internet. We have to integrate with them. So yeah, it's all over the place. We have a lot of integrations.
This, I'm going to assume then, because this is so many things, that you have a team of like 1 million people to support all of this. So what's the reality? So, one of the things that we love to do is in different areas, look at how many engineers are involved in an organization, and then how many people are in the security space, and what does that look like as a ratio? So what's it look like in your world?
I am, in terms of, total security team, we're like 5, maybe 6 to about, I say, somewhere between 100 to 150 engineers. So we're looking at maybe, it's quite small, I guess, but I feel like people always say it's quite small. I think, to be honest, I actually think it's adequate at the moment. I think it's
I like that. That's strong.
I mean, I know that's not something that my boss is going to for me to say, but like it's the truth to a certain degree, because we always want more resources. I feel like that's the nature of a company, in the market and stuff. And so we always want more resources. So we always want to say that we need more and more and more. But the case is that theoretically, in my mind, there's an equilibrium, right? Like there's what the business does and how big it is and what it needs to achieve with technology. And then for that amount, those needs, right, there's an appropriate amount of security or a mature amount of security. And you can go above and beyond that if you want, but theoretically there somewhere should be an equilibrium. And I'm not going to say that we are at that equilibrium, because I imagine it's always shifting, because organizations like people are dynamic. But I feel like, in my technical team, so AppSec for me is really what it means and belongs team is AppSec is the technical security engineers. Yeah. So we also have, our GRC and our sort of CISO and stuff like that. And, those are more, board and executive interfaces and strategists, and also, risk and compliance and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I really like that you have this strong opinion on this, because, very few people talk very concretely about, do I have enough? And 5 to 150, for there's many organizations listening out there who don't have 5. So it's great that that's that adequate point. So which bits work well at 5? And if you got to have a little bit more, what would you do with it? Is there a bit that's left behind, but you're okay with it right now?
I think I mean, and I think, there's lots of different frameworks that cover this kind of problem, in the CSF, and in fact, lots of fantastic books, including yours, which, talk a lot about sizing and like, what's appropriate and what you want to attack and do first. And then, of course, the other side of that coin is what do you choose to not do? What do you choose to leave behind? And I think in my mind, at Belong, we really have a situation where we want to move beyond the basics, and I think when I refer to basics, I'm referring to more traditional risk-oriented technical security, like vulnerability management. I know people are going to shake their fist at me for calling vulnerability management technical, but it is. That data has to come from somewhere, and depending on how complex your deployments are and your code bases and your SDLC, it can be a really difficult task. And I think for us, we want to take the path to doing more than the basics is to make the basics better and seamless. And it's, to be honest, that is more of an organizational and people problem than it is a technical problem. Yeah, that's what I'd say. In terms of what we've had to sort of leave behind and what I think would be fixed more effectively if we had more resources, I think it would just be walking down that path to seamlessness a little bit quicker than we are now, moving towards that brighter future that we all hope and dream of in the security engineering space.
I really love this because this has overlaps actually with UX, right? And actually what you mentioned about your business needing excellent customer support. Excellent customer support is about having a good seamless experience. It's about, it doesn't cause you pain to do it. And I don't think we spend enough time in security thinking about how much pain is in the processes that we try and, put into our dev teams, into our projects. And the idea of, the more resource leads to more seamless experiences, I think is really cool. I think many of us could take some lessons from that and focus on not just, are we getting the job done, but how is it that happens? Is it working for us, or is it causing pain or friction? Have you got an example of a process that you're particularly proud of? I love to give people a chance to brag about something. I know you're not the type who would naturally do it, so I'm going to just try and force you to, because we're on, being recorded.
No, that's perfectly fine. I think something I'm proud of recently, that we did is, I mentioned before that, there's, ACMA and, multi-factor authentication, MFA. So recently, the regulator released, or rather not that recently anymore, it's been a few months, but the regulator, put out an RFC maybe about a year and a half ago now about requests for comments, asking the industry, we want a better authentication, right? Because I think as lots of people in the security community are aware, one of the number one ways of attacking people is supply chain attacks or third-party attacks. And especially if it's a utility, especially if it's internet related, if you can SIM swap someone or if you can compromise their connectivity, then you've got sort of keys to the kingdom when it comes to data, really, and getting impersonation, So they wanted to, legally enforce through their sort of legislative instrument framework that they have here in Australia to make telcos do multi-factor authentication. And it's a really long and I could talk for endlessly about it, since it was a whole obviously legal consultation process and then a build process and a compliance process. But ultimately, I think what I was most proud of is that towards the end there, we got to nail down, how do you meet the bridge between technical knowledge and SME technical knowledge, subject matter expert stuff, and the compliance side of things. I feel like this is one of the problems that, again, we all want to know the answer to. How do we bridge the gap and how do we make the knowledge easy to understand? And, so in our case, we're liaising with our legal team, our counsel, and then also, I'm working usually with a technical team in Belong or a product owner to, check if something's compliant, namely around authentication flows. So we had a situation recently where we redid our mobile apps authentication work, sort of flow, and we wanted to make the experience more seamless for the customer, right? But we also have to have it remain compliant with the legislation that's been created. And it was a great experience for me working with the product owner and the technical SMEs, because we really, I think, we talked a lot and, we ranted and raved at each other for a bit, initially thinking, I think, that we were in disagreement with each other. But then after planning it out, we created a really great process, just on a Miro board, on a mind map, that really took, all the points of legislation, broke down the legalese and what was, what wasn't, and then, went through this compliance process, internally, just to sort of, check our compliance. And obviously, ultimately, the legal team is the final say in, those kinds of activities. But it's, I was proud that we were able to find a way to bridge that gap and to use a more human kind of process to do it. It wasn't like a technical checklist. It wasn't like a PCI thing. It was like, here's a Miro board. Here's the instructions, take all the views and the flows, mind map them to the different sections. And then for each section, there's like hey, does it have this? Are you doing this? And then if you need references, go here. And creating a really human process that made that experience, I think, more seamless and enjoyable was something that I was truly proud of. I really enjoyed that experience.
That's a really great example. I spend a lot of time in compliance regimes myself, trying to negotiate, the various ones from state ramp and FedRAMP to ones like, for the telco industry, of what do they require us to do? And there's a lot of standards, and they try and do the same things, but they often use very different wording. And, there's a lot to navigate. And I think there is something very good to be said for the process you went through, where it was broken down and made more human, because compliance that doesn't feel human, it doesn't feel achievable, or that you can't navigate without, conflict, is never going to be met. So that's a cool thing to have achieved. And I'm sure there's folks out there who are navigating compliance regimes of their own, who perhaps could go and start doing a bit of a mind map of their own, breaking it down in a way. Maybe that could be your homework for the week, team. Right, looking at the time, we've had a really good chat, Lachlan. I'm just going to ask you one question, though, to put you on the spot and to round us out. So you've been doing it a few years, and you're having an amazing career. It's fantastic. What do you think is going to be the big change in the next 5 years in AppSec? What's coming?
Really good question. I think, tying back to, what we talked about at the start, in fact, organizations organizations and security are changing. And, I think people have, first it was cyber, and then now we have, supply chain and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of those kind of seemingly are buzzwords to a certain degree. But I think what it really says is, we're, a few years ago, we really started the process at which security became a mandatory thought for all organizations. Not mandatory in the sense that they're legally enforced and required to do it. Obviously, that varies country to country. But that board members and people who start technology businesses that use technology, and, vast majority of them, in fact, are probably nearly impossible to make a business without technology today. But, they know about it. They have to think about it. They know it's an important thing to consider at the very least. And where we're really seeing the shift, I think, and where it's going to continue, is that we are going to start to understand what that balance is, that equilibrium is that I mentioned earlier. We've got this, sort of, seesaw or, equilibrium we're trying to find between, we've got our frameworks. We know how to do security. We know how to get people who know security, how to hire for it and how to train for it. And, we've got people who offer consulting services. We know how to go to if we can't do it ourselves. And maybe we want to build it ourselves. I think it's really that at the board and the executive level, at the organizational level, and somewhat to do with the legislative level as well. We're really going to discover, over the next sort of 5 years, I think, what the public thinks is appropriate security, and that's going to influence a lot of legislation kind of stuff and a lot of government sort of things. But we're also going to discover, what businesses think the appropriate security model is. I think there's a lot of frameworks out there, and some of them have different varying ideas on the nuances, not so much about the what you need in the basics, but about the how and the why. And I think we're going to see a lot of evolution in that area. And we're hopefully as an industry going to mature a bit more, because we're still quite young, and get to a better picture and better place around what is the de facto, what is acceptable. And so much so that hopefully, I'd prefer to be an optimist here, that, it improves security, everywhere. And, we think about it and consider it more in our consumer decisions, and businesses think about it more when they operate, and governments think about it more when they legislate.
That's a really great way to round us out. And, for those listening at home, maybe that's the question to ask yourself. For your users, for whatever amazing technology you're building, what is their expected level of security and what would be acceptable. And I think that many of us, if we really dug into that, would learn something just by having those conversations. Lots to think about here. Lachlan, really super amazing to have you on. And I'm thrilled to see you going from the pen test days that we all started out in and now doing such amazing things at Belong and to whatever comes next. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure.
And just to round out, team, remember you have to do all those things. That's how the world works. We're supposed to like and subscribe and comment on things. So, find something to like and subscribe and comment on. That's a good idea. And if you're looking to bring some AppSec to your world, remember you can sign up at onehourappsec.com and join up to pledge 1 hour of every sprint to do some AppSec in your world. So whether you're in Taipei or in Timaru in New Zealand, it doesn't matter. Every team can do a little bit of AppSec. Join me next time. I'll see you soon.